All right, I'm just gonna give a minute to let everybody in. I see people slowly joining. All right. So, hi, everybody. My name is Caddy. I am the head of student recruitment, and welcome to the Australian Law panel. So, first, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. I know the panel members can hear me. If you guys can, at some point in the chat, say you can hear me, that would be awesome. And to start, I quickly wanted to introduce Austrec, who we are, what we do. The panel members will then introduce themselves, and then we will begin with the questions from you guys. So you can ask your questions at any point in the chat function on the bottom. Just type in your question. It's going to pop up in the public chat, and I'll go ahead and ask it at some point throughout the whole presentation. So, okay. So to begin, we as Austrec, for those of you guys who are not familiar with us, we are a Canadian company based out of Ontario, and we assist Canadian students with the whole application process to apply to Australian universities. We help you through every single step of the application process, and all of our services are free because we are sponsored and paid by our university partners. And today we have our alumni who I believe everybody here used Austrec to go to Australia. And so they can chat about that experience. And we also have our university partners who are in Career Echo. I'm just going to go ahead and paste the link to get into Career Echo if you haven't registered already. We have our university partners who are waiting to chat with you guys there. They can talk to you about anything from accommodation, financing, COVID restrictions, admission requirements, deadlines, when to apply. They are there to chat with you guys. So I'm just going to put the Career Echo link right here. Perfect. And otherwise, I think we're ready to get started with the panel. I'm going to go and ask everybody to introduce yourselves, your name, where you're from, what school you went to in Australia, what you're doing now, and if you remember, lastly, to say, what did you love about Australia? Supri, maybe I'll ask you to go first.
Sure. So my name is Supri. I went to Griffith University in Gold Coast, Australia. I'm currently in Toronto, Canada, and I work in Mississauga as a lawyer and a business owner. Something that I loved about Australia, weather, obviously. I don't think there's anywhere that you will find that is more laid back than Australia.
Ryan, do you want to go ahead?
And then anything else? Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, you guys can go.
What do you want next?
Go ahead, Ryan.
Okay. All right. My name's Ryan. I am from Hamilton, Ontario. I currently live and practice law in Toronto. I went to Bond University, also on the Gold Coast. My favorite thing about Australia would probably be living basically on the beach. So I didn't live on campus for my 2 years there. My partner and I, we rented an apartment, like you could throw a football and hit the ocean. We were that close. And it was just so amazing to wake up and have your walk on the beach every morning and watch the sunsets and live that lifestyle for 2 years. So really missing that, especially during Canadian winters. But hey, here we are.
Hi everyone, my name is Dave. I am originally from north of Toronto, a place called Aurora. I'm currently living and working north of the GTA as well. I went to the University of Newcastle, which is about 3 hours north of Sydney. So it's not quite as far north as the Gold Coast, but it was a really beautiful place. And I would agree, I loved living next to the beach for a prolonged time. I would say probably my favorite thing is the friendships actually that I developed in Australia. I have a number of really close Australian friends that I see whenever I can and keep in really close touch with. And I think it's a really valuable thing to have a network of friends and colleagues that's in a different country as well.
Perfect. And so to just start in terms of law, taking you back before you even decided what law school to go to, how did you guys decide law was the profession for you? And so this question is for everybody on the panel.
I think for me, I don't know. I feel like I've always wanted to do law. There was never really anything else. So when I started my undergrad, I started in first year with the route to go to law school. That was always the plan.
So for myself, this is kind of a silly answer, but in my high school, we had an elective law class, and I took that in, I think, grade 11, and then I took it again in grade 12. And up until that point, going through high school, everyone's saying, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to go to university for this. Especially when you're gearing up in grades 11 and 12, you're kind of thinking, what do I want to go to university for? What do I want a degree in? And I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do until I took that elective in high school. And we did like a mock trial as part of it, and I was hooked. And that's it from there. I went to Carleton University in Ottawa for my undergrad, and Carleton is one of the few universities that offers an undergrad in law. So there's a couple of universities like Guelph, I know, is one that do like a criminology degree, but this one was specifically geared towards law. Wasn't really like the legal practice of law, but kind of the theories behind it. So I took that as my undergrad, and yeah, that kind of just solidified my interest in continuing and going on to law school and eventually taking it into practice.
Yeah, my story is a little similar to Ryan's in that it was kind of a little bit by circumstance that it happened for me. My undergrad was in engineering. I did it at Queen's University, which is also in Ontario, and I practiced in engineering for a few years and didn't find I really enjoyed it all that much. But I had a close friend who had gone straight from engineering into law school, and he was practicing IP law, which is quite tied to the technical side of engineering. And I ended up doing sort of a job for him indirectly and got exposed to law that way and really loved it. So that was kind of the direction that took me there. It was a little bit by chance, but his influence as well. So it wasn't something that I necessarily knew right from the beginning, but yeah, I'm very happy to have gone down that route. And I practiced in IP for a few years before. Now I'm working as general counsel, but that's really what led me to that decision.
That's awesome. Yeah. And so in terms of going to Australia and studying law there specifically, what made you guys decide to go to Australia versus a different country or even staying in Canada? And I know, I guess it's a little bit of a tough question, but I think it's also a question that a lot of students are wondering, why Australia instead of another option? So what would you guys say to that?
I think for me, so I'm going to be completely honest. I did apply to law school in Canada, did not get in, tried twice. It was too hard. Instead of waiting and rewriting the LSAT and hoping for a higher score, I just wanted to get started with it. So I did apply first originally to the UK because from like where I'm from, everyone always just talks about going to law school in London, and there's a bunch of law schools in London. So I had applied there. Funding didn't work out, so I took a year off. And that's when I actually learned about Australia from a family friend because he had gone to Bond. So I looked into it. And then when I had applied, I realized that Griffith had all the Canadian classes that I needed to write to come back to Canada, the NCA exams. So that was just kind of what sold me over. And then in terms of the whole process, I found it very easy. And I think that helped me make my decision.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go next. It seems to be the pattern that we're following. So yeah, mine was kind of the same. Full disclosure and absolutely no shame, Supreet, I did the exact same thing. Wrote the LSAT twice, didn't get a great score, applied to law school in Canada and no luck. So I took a year off to work and study and reevaluate and see, well, okay, do I want to maybe change gears and rather than practice law, do I want to go into law enforcement, or do I want to just, go do paralegal work, or, something still along the lines, but without going to law school. And I had a neighbor who did his JD at, I think it was University of Melbourne. And he told me, why don't you go to Australia? That's what I did. And now I'm practicing at one of the big Sister 7 firms in Ontario. It's an option. And I had never really thought about it. And, I looked into it. And yeah, I'm really glad I went. I was very fortunate that, a big thing for me was that my partner was able to come with me to Australia. Their visa process was easy enough that she was able to come down and work for the full 2 years while I was doing school. So we were able to do it together and kind of just treat it as like a big extended, I don't want to say vacation because it's not vacation when you're in the office, 10 hours a day, but like a big trip across the world. So yeah, that was a big factor of why we wanted to do that. And then, obviously the travel aspect of it, you could do your degree up in Thunder Bay. Thunder Bay where Lakehead is, or wherever that really northern one is, but you could do it there and deal with 8 months of winter, or you could go live on a beach and have 12 months of summer. Not really a tough choice there. So
it's awesome. And Dave?
Yeah, I thankfully, well, maybe not thankfully, but I didn't try to write the LSAT. I had just decided, for me, I really wanted to live in another country. I'd never done that before in my life. And I figured this was a really good opportunity to be in a different place. Newcastle is a little bit different than Bond, and I guess from Griffith, I wasn't aware, but there are no specific Canadian classes at this university. So it was a 3-year program. It's a little bit longer than maybe what the two of you dealt with. And but I was excited about that. I wanted to be somewhere else for a little bit longer. So it was more so about living somewhere else was what my initial instinct was. And then after that, I wanted to make certain that when I came back to Canada, whatever degree I was doing would be somewhat transferable. I didn't look specifically at the UK, although I knew as a common law country, Canada will probably transfer very well. But when I spoke with Austrac, it was very clear that there was a good crossover between the Australian legal system and the Canadian legal system. So, and I also really liked the idea of being in somewhere that was a warm, kind of beautiful place. So those were really the factors for me.
Awesome. And for everybody watching, if you guys want to throw in any questions you have into the chat, go ahead. Almost nothing is off limits, I would say. You're welcome to ask what you'd like, and we'll see kind of where it goes. But I'll go ahead and just continue asking the questions that I'm curious about. And if there's anything that comes up for you guys, please go ahead. So it's interesting because we have somebody from Griffith, from Vaughan, from Newcastle. And I'm just wondering if you could kind of do a little elevator pitch about your school and just talk quickly about what made your school great. You've all completed your degrees now, and I'm sure you've talked to many students about your specific school because that's what you know. So I think the people watching would be really curious to hear what makes your particular school great.
Okay, so elevator pitch. Thinking on my feet, I would say Griffith was pretty awesome. And the reason why I had chosen it is because I had actually gone to an Austrac convention in downtown Toronto when they had held it at one of the hotels down there. So what I did was I went there, and I don't know what it was, but Griffith spoke out to me because they did talk a lot about diversity. I did meet a few people that were there looking specifically at Griffith, but not the law program, for the dental program. And just seeing that there were a lot of Canadians, especially like people from Ontario, coming to Griffith, it kind of created a sense of like reassurity that I wasn't going alone. I wasn't going to be the only Canadian. And it was just a little sense of home going to Griffith.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And Griffith does have the Canadian, Bond and Griffith has the Canadian subject. So that's really useful for somebody who wants to come back and who just wants to learn the Canadian content at the school. Yeah. And somebody did ask about which school had the 2 or 3 year program. Supreet and Ryan, I believe, both did the 2-year program. Is that correct?
I did the 3.
You did do 3? Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. And then Dave, I believe you did the 3-year program too. Cool. Yeah,
too.
But also Griffith does have the 2-year program. I just opted for the 3.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so my bond pitch, off the top of my head, I would say it's like that, a combination of that show Crazy Rich Asians and Selling Sunset.
Nice.
It's like LA on steroids going to Bond. The school, it's a very wealthy school and institution, and they invest that money back into the school, whether it's their facilities or their teaching staff or their programs and education programs. It's very high end, and when you're there, you feel that. And living on the Gold Coast, that feeling expands. You go to the shopping malls and everything's so pristine, and like you feel like you're in downtown LA sometimes, and it's all the palm trees and everything. It's crazy. But Bond in particular, like you walk around the campus and you say, how is this a school? How is this a university? It was just a campus unlike anything else I've ever been to here in Canada. I mean, I'm sure there's some pretty nice campuses down in California too, but I haven't been there. But that's my pitch. I loved everything about it. And same thing as what Supreet said. Bond had that really large Canadian cohort. I don't know if we have or if Bond had the biggest Canadian cohort of the Australian schools, but at any given time, I think there were approximately 100 to 150 Canadian students studying law, between law, architecture, and medicine at Bond. So roughly about 100 law students, and then a couple in medicine and a couple in architecture and some of the other programs, but a lot of Canadians. So we had a Canadian Law Student Association, which I was president of for a little while. And, you really get that sense of home from being surrounded by your Canadian cohort. And it's benefited me because now I have colleagues practicing law all over Canada, as well as people back in Australia that I can, keep in touch with. So I have colleagues who are in Vancouver. I have people in Calgary, all over Ontario. So that's really interesting too, because in practicing law, I'll get a call from a client who says, I have a company over in Alberta, or, I need to sue someone, but they're in BC. What do I do? So I can call up one of the people I went to law school with who's in BC, in Vancouver or Victoria, and say, hey, can you help me out? My client needs this. What do I do here? And that's really helpful too. So those international connections and national too, I guess, are really helpful. And I guess that was a bit longer than an elevator pitch. It was a long elevator ride, but
that was awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Newcastle is a little bit different in that it's not, it doesn't have the same contingent of Canadians, at least when I was there. It may have changed since when I was, but I think there were a total of maybe 4 or 5 Canadians in the whole program, maybe the whole school. So and again, it's a 3-year program. It didn't have the Canadian law courses. So it's a little different of an approach, but I think I said earlier, one of the things I was really thankful for, and still am, is that I felt very integrated into the Australian community and did make a number of close friends that were Australians. And so that's really where, my joy from being there has come from. The other really great thing about Newcastle, in my opinion, is that they offer a diploma of legal practice. So it's essentially their version of articling, and you do it as part of your education. So when I graduated, I was also sworn into the Australian courts, so I can practice law in Australia. And I actually stayed there for about 5 months working in law. So there was a real practical nature associated with it. I did placement at a few different legal, not just firms, but also in-house. That's where I started to learn about what an in-house sort of practice could look like. And so the sort of practical nature of what they offered in the education, to me, was really valuable. It just giving you that practical experience. So, but it's also a little, maybe as a town, a little more laid back than the Gold Coast. For sure it is. It's if Gold Coast is LA, it's more of like maybe a Santa Cruz, like pretty chill in place. It's not quite the same pristine sort of value to it, but it's I think a really quiet, beautiful community, again, with a lot of people that are really friendly and more of that sort of country town feel. It's on the ocean, so it's not a country town by Canadian standards, but more of that attitude. So
Yeah, I was going to ask you because I think in Australia, when you're considering going to law school, there's, the Sydney, Melbourne's, which is the big cities, kind of like Vancouver, Toronto comparison. And then there's the Gold Coast, which we would consider a smaller city. And then Newcastle really has a kind of a homey vibe, but it's beautiful. Still on the ocean, just a little bit quieter than the Gold Coast buzz of like Miami comparison, I guess. And so in terms of Newcastle, did you live close to the ocean when you were there, or did you live on residence? Is there one that you would kind of recommend over the other?
Sure, I'll start with there. Yeah, I lived away from campus the whole time. I actually lived with people that I had been put in touch with through the university that were other students. They weren't in the law program, but they were Australians. And I didn't live right on the beach, but I lived close enough that I could walk there in sort of a 10, 15-minute walk. So I spent a lot of time down there. And eventually I moved a few times within the city, and just always, living with friends I'd made in the program or friends I'd met through friends. So I think I lived in 3 different spots, one different each year. And they were all relatively, close to the ocean, and,
Awesome.
still close to campus. There's a city campus as well as a country campus. And the city campus was walkable for me. In the country campus, there's actually a train that runs from downtown, takes you to the country campus. It's about a 10-minute ride. So it was, very accessible for walking. I didn't need a car or anything like that. So it was different place every time, never on campus.
And did you, Dave, ever participate in I believe it's called law clinics on the beach?
Yeah, I actually wasn't part of the Law on the Beach program. It went on during the first summer I was there. But I was actually doing my placement was at a different spot. So part of what they offer is this diploma of legal practices. They place you, and you can choose to do law on the beach as part of your placement. I was actually placed at a firm for that summer, so I wasn't part of that, but I had a few friends who did it, and they said it was great. So
it's awesome. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. And so in terms of studying in Australia, a lot of students want to know, it all sounds beautiful, like the ocean, all the fun and games and everything, but what were the challenges of actually living abroad and studying abroad? If you could kind of give a bit of a perspective into that.
For me personally, it was the fact that I was so far from home. I come from a big family. Everyone lives in the same area. So going 21 hours away from home, flight, 21-hour flight, that was like the hardest flight I've ever had to do. It was really hard, especially because even in my undergrad, I had lived at home and I just commuted. So being away from home for the first time, plus being so far that I can't, go home for the weekend, that was probably the hardest part.
Yeah, it's a long flight. It's the first couple times you do it, it doesn't feel right that you're on a plane for that long. Yeah.
Some of the challenges are definitely, being so far. I would say finances really too is a little bit difficult for me. I mean, given that I did the 2-year program at Bond, everything's accelerated, it's all go with school. It's really, I found it difficult to, get a job and try and, get some income while studying. It was virtually impossible. So for me, trying to be involved with the school community and stay on top of the work and everything and get the good grades, I didn't work over there. So, making ends meet was a challenge. I had money saved, and obviously, we all love those law school loans, but it is challenging for sure. So for me, one other aspect of finances too was getting your money from Canada to Australia. It's become easier. Like, even if you have your money sitting in a Canadian bank account, how do I access that when I'm 21-hour plane ride away from Canada? It's a little challenging, but they do have some banks that have partnerships with Canadian banks. I think it was, I can't even remember what bank I was with. I was with Scotiabank in Canada and Westpac in Australia, and they had like some kind of sistership through the banks. I don't know. So I could like stick my Scotiabank debit card into a Westpac and it would shoot out cash. So I was like, whatever, I'm cool with that. So that worked for me. But Yeah, that was probably the biggest challenge. Obviously law school is expensive.
Mhm.
No one's going to tell you it isn't. So being able to be okay with your financial situation and know that, yeah, I'm going to probably struggle through this, but I'll come out the
Mhm.
other side better for it. At least that's what works for me. So
Yeah,
definitely a challenge.
awesome.
Yeah, I agree with Ryan there. For me also, it was the initial shock of being so isolated was hardest part. I think the adjustment when you get there of not really having any sort of a support system, right? Unless you had family or friends there, but I think in all of our cases we didn't. So just trying to make your way through, especially those first maybe a month and a half for me was the hardest part. I felt so isolated. I didn't know anybody at that point, and I didn't really have someone to rely on. So that was a bit of a difficult period. But like I said, once you sort of become a part of that community, it changed quite quickly for me, and I'm so happy that it did. But that was for sure the hardest part, being away
Yeah.
so far from everybody else in your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think something as Austrek we've been trying to do over the last probably 5 years or so is we started doing meetups in the big city centers. So we do one in Vancouver, in Toronto, in Calgary, sometimes Edmonton, and essentially try to introduce other Austrek students to each other. And it's not necessarily all law students, it's gonna be like medicine, dentistry, etc. I don't know if Ryan or Saprit, if you guys participated in those before you guys went, but no.
I didn't at here, but I did a meetup in Australia
Oh,
actually.
cool. Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. So hopefully we do try it because I know exactly what you mean. I also went to Australia in 2013 and I didn't participate in any of that. So my partner is studying there and he didn't participate in that. So yeah, I definitely understand the isolation period at the very beginning. But then hopefully once you're in school and have the opportunity to meet people, kind of gets better there. It's awesome.
I think one of the other things that you do have to get used to as well is the way of living there. So one, going off of what Ryan said, cost of living insanely high there. You can't go out and eat every single night without blowing at least $200, $300. And then like just the way of living, you have like you'll finish classes at 5 and find all the stores have shut down at 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
The only things open are Kmart and the grocery stores. So the amount of times that I've walked around Kmart in Australia is just unreal. So I think that was also one of the things that I had to get used to is that everything was very slow compared to what I was used to, where here it's just go, go, go.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
the lifestyle is very slow. I think one time we had I think it was like a leaky shower. Our toilet was leaking or something like that. So we called a plumber and we were like, hey, like, can we get you to come out and fix this? And he says, oh yeah, I have some time in 2 weeks. And I was like, okay, great. I guess I'll see you in 2 weeks and hope my apartment doesn't flood. But yeah, they definitely take their time in Australia. Things move slowly, and it's something I'm envious of.
Yeah,
Being back here in Canada for sure.
it's a very relaxed lifestyle. They say come over for a Barbie and which is a barbecue. And it's definitely a bit more of a very relaxed attitude. But that being said, I heard that once you're actually in the legal field in Australia, it's very fast moving, like high expectations. But otherwise, in terms of customer service and everything, they have a very chill kind of island living life kind of vibe to them, right? Yeah, I was gonna ask Dave, you mentioned you're in-house now, is that correct? Yeah, so I'm just wondering what made you make that decision to do that instead of working for a firm, which I think a lot of people kind of envision themselves doing after they graduate. So can you give us a little bit of kind of your history of how that decision was made?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm a little bit older than the other panelists here. So I initially did work at a firm. I came back and went through the process of the accreditation that I needed to go through, which was probably different to the other two members because I didn't have the Canadian Law School courses, but it was relatively. I don't know the same what you guys went through, but it was NCA exams, which are essentially equivalent exams for your education. And then I started practicing at a firm, did my articling there, and it was in IP law. And I actually really enjoyed it for the first few years. I became an associate after my articling period, and I worked as an associate there for 4 years. By the end of my sort of 2.5 years, I started to get kind of jaded with the balance of life that I had. It was a difficult adjustment for me to be so committed to exclusively my career. Again, it's depending on your own personality, but for me, it was just the balance wasn't quite right. So I started to think about ways I could continue to practice law that maybe didn't have the same expectations of the firm style practice. And I had, again, another friend who was working in-house, and talked to him several times about how he had more balance in his life. And it also appealed to me to learn more about general law practice instead of a specific kind of law. So it was really about the balance, and also more challenge around some of the other things that I would be practicing law besides an individual specialty. So, and it worked. I find it's a much better balance for me, and I'm really happy with the lifestyle I get from doing this while still being involved with law.
Are you working on team, or are you essentially the lawyer within that company?
For this company, yeah, I'm the only lawyer. And it took a while, specializing in IP. I had a really specific background. It is a tech company, so that's valuable. I do maybe 30-40% of my in-house practice is IT related or IP related, but I had to learn things about business law, and employment law is a big one that they seem to ask me about, which I didn't know a ton of, but
yeah,
it helped to have a network, right? I had a network through friends and through my original sort of 4 years in firm life that allowed me to sort of draw on that to learn more. But I'm still, would not call myself an expert in those fields.
That's pretty amazing though, that you get a chance to leave that firm lifestyle, I guess, and go work for, be the person that is in charge of everything, because what are they going to know, I guess, right? You ask people what you need to know, and that's such a kind of other spectrum of the law field, right? And it just shows that you don't need to be in this grinding culture if that's not for you. There's many different options, and I know, Supri, you started your own firm, is that correct?
Yeah, so when I did my articling, I actually did it at a firm that worked as like a shared space firm. So it's a law group that it was an umbrella company that held a bunch of different other law firms, which would be just individual sole proprietors. So when I did my articling, I worked under one of them, and it really appealed to me, the fact that I didn't have to work your 9 to 5. You can set your own schedule, come in whenever, as long as you get your work done, you hit your own deadlines. So once I finished, passed the bar, everything was done, I approached the partners of this firm and asked them if they had space for me. So I work there, technically my own boss, but I get clients from them, get my own clients, and work from there.
That's amazing. That's so interesting. And then Ryan, you're more in the firm setting, is that correct? Yeah,
I am. Yeah, I'm the big firm guy.
Yeah, that's right.
When I came back, I did the whole NCA process. Did the articling. I articled at a boutique litigation firm on Bay Street here in Toronto. Very small firm. There's 4 lawyers, including myself as an articling student. So I had my hands on everything litigation. Like we did criminal law, we did regulatory, we did all the civil litigation, everything. All that fun stuff that puts you in court in front of a judge. So that's what I did there. And then after getting called, I worked there for a little bit and wanted to join a bigger team. Working in a boutique firm was a little isolating for me, given that my cohort of contacts was so small within the firm itself. There wasn't really anyone to lean on or learn from. So I decided to make the move, and now I'm at a bigger firm where there's, I think, 80 lawyers or something like that. So quite a big firm here in Toronto, and still practicing litigation, and it's going really well. So I like the firm that I'm at. I'll speak to what Dave said about balance. At least in my experience, I found that it differs from firm to firm, like quite drastically. Like when I was at the boutique firm, you would think because it's so small and only a couple lawyers, it would be very balanced. It was the exact opposite. It was very intensive, getting phone calls at 9, 10 p.m., like very go, go, go. And then once I made the switch to this bigger firm, a lot of the partners encourage balance. And that's one of the reasons I took the job at this firm as opposed to somewhere else. You know, they understand that if you burn yourself out, you're not going to be able to do the work and do it well. So they really encourage having that balance. So it really just differs within the practice, within, you know, law firms, even, you know, whether you go private practice, government, whether you go in-house to a firm, you're going to get a different work-life culture wherever you go. And I don't think it's necessarily consistent based just upon what area of practice you're in, I guess you could say.
Yeah. And I think a big question a lot of students have, and you guys, I'm sure, had the very similar question when you were applying to law schools in Australia, is about coming back to Canada. I would say most people who apply to law schools in Australia or abroad, their goal is to come back to Canada, where that's not necessarily the same for medicine, dentistry, that kind of thing. But for law, typically students want to come back to Canada. So Supreet and Ryan, I believe you guys both did the NCA exam from the time you graduated, and Dave, you would have as well. So if you guys could quickly just give us an idea of how was the NCA? Was it a difficult process? Was it difficult to pass? And also, of course, the $1 million question of articling positions. Tips on how to get the articling position now that you guys have all done it, now that you guys have succeeded.
NCA exams, I did find that they were very similar to my law school exams. I didn't find it to be crazy hard. I just put the same amount of effort that I did studying for law school exams. You do get like the whole booklet with all the information that you should be studying. Or no, sorry, that wasn't for the NCAs. You have like the textbooks and stuff they say to read through it and things like that, which I found that doing the law school, doing the classes at law school helped me a lot with learning certain things that I didn't have to self-teach myself. Coming back, I found, so I came back, did the NCAs, COVID happened, all my exams got pushed back. So it wasn't as transitional as I wanted it to be. But once I finished, wrote the bar exam, everything was good after that. Articling wise, I did intern before I started law school, and that was the same firm that I did my articling with. So it did help that I had that connection prior to law school, that when I came back, I just went up to them and I was like, do you have space for me? They said yes, and I started.
Awesome.
Yeah, I would typically agree. The NCAs I thought were not, I wouldn't say they were grueling by any means. I think they weren't a breeze either. But you know, I always said to students who were coming out of Australia after me, when they would ask me, oh, what do I do? How were they? I said, you know, if you've done the Canadian courses at Bond or, you know, at law school, if you've taken those Canadian courses and written those Canadian course exams, the NCA is basically the exact same. I took my, you know, notes and templates from law school that I had used for those exams in law school, took them straight into the NCA, and I had no problem. I passed them all first shot. That's not to say I didn't study. You know, I did spend probably 3 weeks of intensive study prior to the NCAs, and then I wrote all 5 in the one sitting. So, I mean, it is still, you know, it's exams. You still have to study. You still have to pass them. But yeah, in terms of articling, here's one thing that I would say is a challenge coming back to Canada from studying in Australia that I tend to make people aware of before they go overseas and study in Australia is it's difficult to get your foot in the door in law coming back from Australia, particularly if you want to be in a big firm like one of the Sister Seven. And the reason being is that a lot of those big firms take their articling students directly from their summer student pool. So if you're not studying here in Canada and if you're not being a summer student at these firms, your chances are 9 times out of 10, you're not going to get their articling position. That's at the big firms. I'm not saying that's the same with the smaller firms. That's where I ended up getting articling, right? Because the smaller firms don't care where you went to school. They don't care whether you summered or whether you were an intern. They are just looking for someone with the experience and the education and someone who fits the bill and fits in with their team. That's where I fit in. You know, I wasn't here. I didn't do summer student positions in Canada. I came back, did my NCAs, and started looking for articling. So I had quite a few interviews for articling. Well, I shouldn't say quite a few. I had maybe half a dozen. And then I ended up at the one that I ended up choosing here in Toronto. And the reason I picked that one was just because, you know, the exposure of being downtown, I wanted to get that, you know, on the resume as the articling position for, you know, whatever good it would do opening doors down the road. And yeah, so I put myself through that struggle. But yeah, it's challenging coming back from Australia. I don't think we're at a disadvantage compared to like Canadian students. I don't think a firm is going to look at your degree or your resume and say, oh, you went to Bond or you went to Griffith, whereas this person went to Western. I'm going to pick the person from Western. I don't think that's the case. I think it's just you miss out on some things that Canadian law students get from studying here in Canada, such as those summer student and internship positions. But I wouldn't change the way I did it, and I just tell people that going in, so people can make an informed choice. Really.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Dave, so Supreet and Ryan both did Canadian courses. You didn't do them at Newcastle. So how was your experience of doing the NCAs? Because you would have had to go a little bit above and beyond to study for them. So I'm really curious to hear that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting actually to hear Ryan say they had to write 5. I only had to write 4. So you know, they go through a process, I guess, of assessing, you know, the courses you've done, the classes you've done. It's a whole sort of application process you go through, at least when I did it, the NCAs I'm talking about, and they determined I only needed to write 4 of them. So it was difficult, you know, but at the same time, I did feel the same way. My exams, although, you know, particular case law might have been different, legislation slightly different, but for the most part, the concepts are very similar. So, you know, it was a pretty easy, not easy, but it was a fairly, I would say, comfortable transition to be writing the Canadian. It's independent study, and, you know, it took the same kind of commitment that they're both talking about. You know, you study hard for a long period of time, but that's what you do when you're, you know, when you're used to writing law school exams. So it was okay for me. I got through without problem right away. So I was, you know, I felt comfortable with the process. I definitely think the bar exams were a lot more of a difficult challenge than the NCA exam. So for me, that's really where, you know, I had to really buckle down. But yeah, it wasn't so bad coming from a non-Canadian law focused law school.
Awesome. And what about your articling position? How was it finding that?
Well, I think the sort of diploma of practice was very helpful for me because I had already essentially an accredited practicing designation in another country. So, you know, and I had practiced law somewhere else with experience in another legal setting. So I was able to get interviews when I came back, not at the Big 7 that Ryan's talking about. I also, IP is a relatively small segment of practice, and it does, you know, my background as an engineer also helped with that because it's, you know, that's kind of a package that people are looking for that particular kind of practice. So, I definitely had some particularities about it, but for me, I think the actual practical application and having worked in firms in Australia was very, I think, beneficial when I presented to articling opportunities here in Canada.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. And so for the last question, and we just have 5 minutes left. If you guys, so a question for Elnaz, from Elnaz, what advice would you guys give your past self before starting law in Australia?
I would probably give myself the advice to enjoy my time being there. That being said, that's because when I went there, I had the mindset that I'm paying a lot of money to be here. I was very privileged to come here, so I need to focus on school only. Not saying that I didn't enjoy myself there, but I would probably put more of a balance in enjoying myself, making sure that I take all the opportunities given to me to go out and enjoy myself. Either with school events or other social events with friends, and to just, you know, just be in the moment and don't worry about school all the time.
Yeah, that's a good one. Geez, what would I say? I would probably tell myself, don't stress it. Things are going to work out. I think going into law school, it's really daunting. You're taking on this huge challenge of going to law school. You're taking on this, most of us are taking on quite a large sum of debt to just be there. And it is, it weighs on your mind. At least for me, early on, the first couple semesters, I'm seeing how much I'm paying in tuition. I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I ever going to recover from this? But don't stress it. Law is a profession that you come out the other side and you're better for it. I don't stress it anymore. Well, as much, I should say, but things work out. So, yes, it's a challenge. Yes, it's daunting, but enjoy it while you're there. And everything's going to work out in the end.
I don't know if I could really put it much better. I feel the exact same way. It's really about enjoying the moment while you're there, which is really difficult when you feel so focused on trying to achieve this goal. As we all know, is not a simple thing to get through, but there's a lot that is happening in a different place, in a different world that you're not used to, that I think is really worth soaking in. So, and maybe having a bit of a more focus on that is probably what I would say.
Yeah, because I guess in the end, you go there, you are capable of finishing that degree, but when you focus so much on that and you forget that you're in such a beautiful country and such a beautiful environment, and then you look back at it and back when it's raining or snowing in Canada, and just thinking about the fact that you lived there for 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and that was your home. It all kind of comes back, especially when you can't travel. So I definitely understand that. Awesome. Well, I think that's it for now, you guys. We really appreciate you guys coming, Supreet, Ryan, and Dave. Thank you guys so much. And for all the attendees, we are going to be logging off, but there are university partners in Career Echo. I sent the link at the very beginning of the presentation. If you guys want to click on that and chat with the universities, they are there to answer any kind of admission questions, deadlines, financing, accommodation, things like that. And so, yeah, that is it. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks so much, Patty.
Guys.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.
See you.
Bye.
Nice meeting you guys.
You too.
You guys. Good seeing you. Bye.
Bye.
See you later.